Hello guys, welcome to Redditor's Revenge. Here we post amazing revenge stories daily, and if you want more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel and stay tuned with us. Moving to today's first story, which is a sweet and satisfying malicious compliance. OP's first boss took on the new president of the club for the sake of his colleagues. Now story. When I turned 14 years old, I got my first summer job and had one of the best bosses I'd ever had. I recently found out that unfortunately my mentor and someone I would consider a friend, John, passed away. Although it's been well over 20 years, I still use the lessons learned and the work ethic he passed on to me. Although at times he could be hard, he was more than fair and always did the right thing for those that worked for him. This is the story of John versus the new president. Before I get into the story, I need to give some background and context on John. John was the textbook all-American boy. John had attended a prestigious boarding school somewhere in New England and eventually attended Yale back in the late 50s or 60s, and was not only a scholar but a three-sport athlete. He played football, boxed, and was a captain of the track and field team. Fast forward to when this story takes place, and John was still in phenomenal shape for the late 60s or early 70s man. John opted to move out to the country and start a family to follow his passion, which was teaching at the local high school and coaching high schoolers in various sports. He was the high school football coach, taught track and field, was an outstanding shot put athlete, and could run the mile and many other long distances. As a teacher, he had the summer off and became a lifeguard at the local town beach, eventually becoming the captain of the lifeguards. Over time, he developed standards for the town, county, state lifeguards to pass. He transformed what was a ragtag style of lifeguards into a full-fledged official lifeguard corps and training academy and set the standards for what is still used today. John was eventually hired to run the lifeguards and manage an entire private beach club instead of working for the town beach. One of the biggest challenges of this, since it was a private beach club, John now reported to a president of the beach club who oversaw how things were run. I started working for John as a helper on the beach and then eventually as a lifeguard, and for the first couple of summers, things were great. The president of the beach club took pride in having the best staff and making sure that lifeguards were well paid, and to his credit, safety was the utmost priority. This private beach club certainly catered to the more wealthy clientele who wanted a nicer club instead of going to the public beach. Some of the advantages were the amenities, which were lockers, cabanas, private parking, and a very nice restaurant that served great food and drinks. This was one of the few beach clubs that also could serve alcoholic beverages. One of the good things John had instituted was that any returning member of the staff from the previous summers automatically got a raise. This ensured that staff returned the next summer, avoiding a lot of retraining, and as you can imagine, growing pains with a new staff. What was even better was that if you returned multiple summers, you still got an additional raise. Most summer this was $1 or $2. As an example, I started at $7.25 at 14 years old. This was back in the late 90s, and by the time I was in college, I was making almost $15 an hour. Typically, the president of the club serves a term, which is a few years, and when his term was up, a new president was ushered in. Upon taking office, the new president loudly proclaimed that he wanted to ensure that the club had fiscal responsibility, and he would be personally going over the books with a fine-tooth comb. His first order of business was to cut everyone's pay all the way back to minimum wage and fire most of the lifeguards. Now, as noted above, the staff was there for a long time, knowing most of the members and how to run the place. Before the start of the summer, upon learning that their hourly wage would be cut, most of the senior staff immediately left and were quickly hired elsewhere. The lifeguards were spared at their appeal to John to ensure safety. Although some senior guards left for other beaches and pools, John was able to convince the lifeguards as he would take care of things. On to the malicious compliance. While John agreed to have the staff take the pay cut, he convinced the new president that any lifeguards with additional certifications would get $2 an hour on top of the base minimum wage. The new president didn't consider that any of these lifeguards would put in the effort, or if it was feasible to get any certifications in time for the summer season, and he agreed to the plan. As you can imagine, John established the process and curriculum for becoming a lifeguard and personally trained and hired most, if not all, the trainers in the town and county. John was also a volunteer fireman and knew all the EMS personnel, and not surprisingly had either taught them in school or hired them as lifeguards in their past lives. John quickly called in favors from every trainer and certifier across the county, who were more than happy to repay all the favors John had done for them in the past. Most waived the training fees and expedited the training sessions for the lifeguards, and they wanted to promote safety for the community. Before the start of the Memorial Day weekend, and what is effectively the unofficial start of summer, all of us lifeguards and new staff become certified in pretty much every single possible certification that existed at the time. I mean, I'm talking crazy complete overkill and unnecessary certifications for a regular lifeguard. We got trained as either Ms or EMTs. Although lifeguards had to be certified in CPR, we retrained and got our CPR certifications again. Life-saving ocean and pool rescue techniques, certified swimming instructor, certified food inspector, certified county pool operator license, certified sanitary inspector. We even had one guy who wanted to learn how to scuba. The county's firefighters had a water rescue team who coincidentally were certified scuba instructors. Most of us guards become certified divers, open water divers, deep water rescue divers, the whole works. I could go on and on about all the certifications we got. The lifeguards not only went back to their original wage, but in most cases went well above what their previous wages were. At 18 years old and back in the 90s, I went from making $15 an hour to $27 an hour, all due to the certifications and training. It took a month or so for the fallout to happen. While the new president tried to renege on the deal, John was smart enough to have a formal arrangement in place, and there was nothing the new president could do besides bitch about it. He winded up resigning his position to spend more time with his family at the beach. We rarely saw him around that summer, and I think he eventually stopped coming altogether, opting to join another club. John made nice with the new president and explained his philosophy on training and keeping staff. The new president agreed, and some of the senior staff winded up coming back with the promise of their original wage. A few weeks ago, I heard from friends and former colleagues that just at the start of the summer season, John passed away in the sleep of natural causes at the ripe age of 91. He was still working, although not as much in the past. It was more of an I want to keep the busy type of thing than a need to work. Every morning he would take out the lifeguard's rowboat and get some exercise in. After all, he was a certified rowing instructor. Rip John, you were the best. Now, here is the end of our first story, and I hope you enjoyed the malicious compliance. Guys, I'd like to hear your opinion about John, and the malicious compliance is satisfying to you or not. And I think everyone needed a boss, teacher, or a friend like John. Let me know what's your opinion in the comments section. So before moving to the final story, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for such more amazing stories. Now, moving to our final story about how OP's frat neighbors' students go wild and disrupt the entire building. So OP shames them in the papers and on the biggest national news station. Now story. In September of 2020, the apartment next to mine was let out to two young women, both students. After they settled in a bit, it turned out they wanted to have a party. No big deal, except Belgium was in full lockdown at this point due to COVID, and you were supposed to only have one fixed visitor over. But then again, to be young again, etc. So I didn't care. During this time, I was working in healthcare. I work with the mentally disabled, but I volunteered for the ad hoc COVID team, meaning I got called upon to tend to those residents who were sick and needed quarantining or were effectively diagnosed with COVID. This meant pretty long working hours, and I spend about 10 to 11 hours a day at work, with a full-hour bike ride to and from work. Needless to say, I was pretty tired pretty much all the time. So I wasn't looking forward to the noise from a party, but I'm pretty chill and know that living in the city, some noise is to be expected. So they are having their party, and I can stand some noise and music, but this party was ducking wild. People shouting full on, in the hallway, wrecking things, etc. At about 4 in the morning, I introduced myself to the neighbors and asked them when they could expect their company to leave, and if they could refrain from having a party the next day, as I have to work and get up at 6 every day. So they promised they would keep it down the rest of the night and that they wouldn't have a party the next day. Plot twist. They did have another party and then did another one the day after. At this point, I had been going a full 3 nights without sleep and was nearing neurosis. Every night I talked to the girls, and every night they would be full of apologies and stuff, but nothing would change. I also felt terrible when I had to enter their place because it would be packed with people, and I work with some very vulnerable people at work who I wouldn't want to spread COVID to. These were pre-tests, pre-vaccines, much of the knowledge we now have about COVID. Luckily the weekend came and they went to their parents and I could recover a bit. Suffice it to say, I wasn't liking my new neighbors. During the next few weeks, they refrained from big parties, but they would have a constant flood of people coming over during the night, and by constant, I mean constant. Like their bell would ring 70 times a night and people would always be coming or going. And those people would be drunk and loud. Our communal hallway is pretty much an echo chamber because it's all stone and any noise will travel throughout the building. I couldn't rely on sleep at night, it drove me crazy. I could only sleep Friday through Sunday because then they would go off to their parents or whatever. I couldn't grasp how they could know this many people that would always be coming and going. One night, while knocking on their door to complain about the noise, I encountered my upstairs neighbor and decided that we would have to join forces to get this to stop. My neighbor told me some important bit of information. The reason people were coming and going all the time was that they used their apartment as a makeshift bar hangout. During this time, bars were closed due to COVID and all those students were using the big apartment to hang out. Moreover, across the street was another frat house with 5 boys living there, and that too was a secret hangout. So people would hang out at those 2 places and cross the street if they wanted a different atmosphere, or wanted to see their other friends, etc., etc. And the boys from across the street would also come over 15 times a night. Most visitors seemed to be law students or affiliated with them. Basically, our communal hallway was just a part of their cafe space now. So we tried talking to the girls, and we started to talk to the visitors. None of them had any sympathy for us when we were asking them to be quiet at 4 in the morning. Most of them just laughed at us, as we were the pesky neighbors, no doubt. Even more of them were just so wasted that they didn't know what they were doing. So we started calling the police dozens of times. Most of the time, they weren't let in and the police told us they couldn't do anything. We kept calling, as we wanted a record of our calls in the system. Belgium was still in full lockdown at this point, and what they were doing was full-on illegal. Even so, police told us their hands were tied if they wouldn't open the door. When the police couldn't help, I turned to the next best thing. I'm a social worker, and so I have no problems looking up information and calling around to look for help, and this is what I did. Most places, student unions, police, town hall were understanding but couldn't do much. So I acted on the suggestion of the upstairs neighbor and contacted one of the girls' deans. I shot him a nice email about sorry to have bothered him and taking up his time. But I had this big group of students from his faculty ganging up every night, and maybe he wanted to know about it since they were breaking every possible COVID rule that existed at that time. Especially since me and my neighbor were about to go to the papers with this story, as secret lockdown parties were becoming a thing in the papers at this point. This dean called me back right away, and we had a nice talk about our problems. He told me he was on it. So basically what he did was call the law student girl and her parents. Big drama ensued, and we finally got to sit down with the girls, and they finally sounded like they were sorry. Tears were shed, for which I had no patience, to be honest. We learned that the police had been inside a few times, and they were issued tickets for having secret parties. Those were €300 each a pop, so no idea why they didn't just stop. We learned they were not happy because the dean had called them up at 11 o'clock and they were still asleep. To which I said, well, there is your problem. You are still asleep at 11 o'clock. I'm up at 6 every day, and you girls haven't been a bit understanding about that. So we got to feel a bit like we got our revenge and we got to vent, but we kept it kinda nice and parted on good terms, hoping that this would be it and we could live together as nice neighbors. But if that were the case, I wouldn't be here, right? You'd think they would have gotten the point now and would refrain from making noise and partying. Well, you'd be wrong. Basically what they did was they moved to the frat house across the street and started partying there. There were slightly fewer people running to and fro, but the noise was still a problem, and we were now in the middle of the second COVID wave, and these people were meeting up with big groups like crazy, while I hadn't seen a soul in almost a year. Never mind the people at my work, who were forbidden from even going to their own friggin' family. The whole thing was just ridiculous. My upstairs neighbor happened to film such a party across the street and had sent the clip to me. We were thinking about going to the press with our story, but weren't sure if it would be a good idea. So I posted the clip of the party on the subreddit of our country to test the waters. It got quite some comments and upvotes, and it seemed most people were also sick of people disregarding the rules and having secret parties. After some talks with the upstairs neighbor, we decided to contact the press and simultaneously go up a step in the university hierarchy and contact the vice rector that had the power to start up a disciplinary case against the students. This person is one of 12 vice rectors for a total campus of about 15,000 students. So quite high up. Things moved fast. Local news picked up our story from Reddit and contacted me, and we gave some background info. They confirmed with the police that cops had been dozens of times to our address and across the street and weren't let in most of the time. We mentioned that the university was involved and that we hoped they would finally intervene. The next day, the piece was on their website. It went viral there and got promoted to the sites of most national newspapers. Its headline was sensational enough, mentioning the dozens of times police had shown up and also mentioning how healthcare workers were being kept up by selfish students. At the same time, the vice rector contacted us to take our statements and informed us they would investigate and could start up disciplinary actions. At the same time, more reporters were contacting me throughout the day, and we made sure to mention that to her and link the university to the printed articles. The next day, while at work, I got a message from the upstairs neighbor that a film crew from the national news was at our doorstep. He declined to talk to them, and I would have done the same since this was getting pretty big now, but they made a segment anyway. And sure enough, that night at 7, here was my street in a short section about cops standing in front of a closed door a dozen times, and the local press cop talking about the troubles of closed doors. The best part about it was that a student from the offending frat house across the street had let the film crew in and said on camera exactly what were accusing them off towards the university, that they had been having parties and didn't let the cops in, and that they had done it multiple times. No ideas what made him think that was a good idea. Anyway, trying not to make a huge story even longer, the press died down sometime later and the disciplinary action from the uni went through. Before the hearing, we sat down with the girls from our block and cleared some things up. We wanted to live like normal people together, and we tried to make some amends. Because we put in a kinda good word for them. They got the lighter end of the stick, 40 hours of community service and some probation. The guys across the street got 80 hours each, and each had to write us a letter of apology, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading every time I got one. The sad part is that most of them sounded just like dumb young kids, but that was after getting called out on the news and being part of disciplinary action. But we never wanted to escalate things this far. Some noise is to be expected when living in the same building, and we were never going to go to these extremes for some expected noises. But these people went to the extremes, and so we were forced to do the same. Rest of the year, a simple message on WhatsApp was enough to silence any noises we had coming from their apartment. If anything, I hope they learned that even very polite and chilled people can become very upset when presented with sleep deprivation and excessive noise. Now, that concludes our video for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. And guys, let me know what's your opinion about this story, and you can also share your similar incident with your neighbors in the comments section. I would love to read them. So before leaving, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more awesome stories.